The galaxy had changed. The question now was whether it would stay changed, or if humanity had just postponed an inevitable confrontation that would be far more devastating when it finally came. 6 months passed, and the transformation was undeniable. The new protection systems weren't just empty promises written in official documents. They were real, functioning networks that connected every station, every colony, every settlement where children lived and grew. The oversight committees that humanity had demanded began their work immediately, and they didn't play favorites. Human officials who failed their duties faced the same consequences as anyone else, proving that this was never about human superiority, but about universal standards that applied to everyone equally. The teacher who had testified during the crisis now ran one of the largest training programs in galactic history. Thousands of officials from hundreds of species attended her courses, learning not just the new regulations, but the philosophy behind them. She taught them to see children not as small adults or future resources, but as beings who deserved protection simply because they were vulnerable. The humans taught us something we had forgotten, she told her students during one memorable lecture. Civilization isn't measured by the height of our towers or the speed of our ships. It's measured by how we treat those who have no power to demand better treatment. The mining station where everything began became a symbol of transformation. Instead of shutting it down or destroying it in shame, the Council converted it into the galaxy's first Children's Safety Institute. The very corridors where a child had been hurt now echoed with the voices of young beings from dozens of species, learning and playing together under protection so thorough that it became the standard every other facility tried to match. The little girl visited the institute on its opening day, walking through halls that had once represented her worst moment. She was older now, more confident, and she carried herself with a quiet strength that reminded everyone why humanity had reacted so fiercely. The director of the institute, from the same species as the supervisor who had caused the crisis, knelt before her with tears streaming down his face. "I cannot undo what my people's representative did to you," he said, his voice breaking. "But I promise that every child who walks through these doors will know safety, respect, and dignity. Your pain bought something precious for the entire galaxy. I will spend my life making sure it wasn't wasted." The child placed her small hand on his shoulder, a gesture of forgiveness that many adults watching couldn't have managed. "Just take care of them," she said simply. "That's all I ever wanted." Back on Earth, humanity's homeworld that had remained largely mysterious to the rest of the galaxy, something unexpected was happening. The World Council called a gathering of all human leadership, and the discussion wasn't about military strength or galactic politics. It was about responsibility. Humanity had forced the galaxy to change, and now they had to live up to the standards they had demanded from others. The Elder, one of humanity's most respected leaders, addressed the assembly with words that would define humanity's role for generations to come. "We scared them. We had to. But now we need to show them that we're not just warriors waiting for an excuse to fight. We're protectors. And protection isn't a one-time dramatic gesture. It's the daily, unglamorous work of making sure systems function properly." Human volunteers spread throughout the galaxy, not as conquerors or saviors, but as partners working alongside other species to build something better. The medic who had spoken during the crisis found herself training emergency responders on a dozen different worlds. The engineer designed safety systems that other species adapted to their unique needs. The counselor helped families from species humanity had never even met before, proving that the drive to protect children transcended biology or culture. The veteran, who had warned the council about humanity's military capabilities, wrote a memoir that became required reading in military academies across the galaxy. In it, he described the moment he realized that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their weapons or their ships. It was their absolute refusal to accept that cruelty was inevitable. "Other species fight when attacked," he wrote. "Humans fight when they see injustice, even if it doesn't affect them personally. That's what makes them dangerous, but it's also what makes them necessary." 1 year after the crisis, the Presidium met with the ambassador in the same chamber where humanity had delivered their ultimatum. The atmosphere was different now, not tense or hostile, but respectful in a way it had never been before. The Council had learned that humanity's demands weren't about dominance. They were about partnership, but only if that partnership meant something real. Your species changed us, the Presidium said quietly. We thought we were civilized because we had peace. But you showed us that peace without justice is just organized cruelty. The galaxy owes you a debt we can never fully repay. The ambassador shook his head gently. You don't owe us anything, but you do owe something to every child in the galaxy. Keep your promises. Make the systems work. And if you ever see us mobilizing our fleets again, know that it means you failed, and we'll be there to remind you of what matters. The little girl grew up in a galaxy transformed by her suffering, never quite understanding how her worst day became the catalyst for millions of better days for others. She became a teacher herself eventually, working at the institute that bore her legacy. And when students asked her about what happened, she always gave the same answer. I learned that I mattered, not because I was special or important, but because everyone matters. And when enough people believe that really believe it, nothing can stop them from building a world where it's true. Humanity never forgot what they had almost done. The warships that had frightened the galaxy remained ready, a reminder that some principles were worth fighting for. But they also became symbols of a different truth, that the strongest weapon any civilization possessed wasn't the ability to destroy, but the courage to demand that the vulnerable be protected, no matter the cost. The galaxy had paid a price for one human child's pain, but in return, it received something infinitely more valuable, a future where no child, from any species, would ever have to wonder if they mattered enough to be protected. And that future, built on the foundation of humanity's fury and the galaxy's willingness to change, became the greatest legacy any civilization could hope to leave behind. 3 hours remaining, and the human fleet transmitted their final position coordinates, and what the Council saw made them realize that everything they thought they understood about this crisis had been completely wrong from the very beginning. The coordinates weren't pointing at the mining station where the incident occurred. They weren't aimed at any Council facility or military installation. Instead, every single human warship had positioned itself in a defensive formation around the most vulnerable civilian zones in the galaxy. Refugee centers, medical stations, schools, orphanages, places where children from dozens of species lived and learned, completely unaware of the crisis unfolding above their heads. The admiral in charge of the human fleet sent a message that reached the Council chamber within seconds. His face appeared on every screen, and what the Council members saw wasn't the expression of a military commander preparing for battle. It was the tired, sad look of someone who had hoped things would never come to this far. "We've repositioned our forces," the Admiral said, his voice heavy with emotion. "You need to understand what that means. Our weapons are hot. Our crews are ready. But we're not aiming at you. We're protecting them. Every child in the galaxy who might be next if we fail here today." The strategic observer, analyzing the fleet positions, suddenly understood the full scope of humanity's plan. They had never intended to destroy the mining station or attack the Council. The entire military mobilization, the countdown, the ultimatum, it was all designed to do one thing: force the galaxy to choose between maintaining a broken system or protecting its children. "It's brilliant," the strategic observer whispered. "They made it impossible for us to claim we care about galactic stability while ignoring justice. Because if we refuse their demands now, we're essentially saying that we value our pride more than the safety of every vulnerable being in our care." The Presidium stood alone in their private chamber, the weight of centuries pressing down on them. They had built this galactic order. They had maintained peace through careful diplomacy and calculated compromises. But humanity had exposed the rot beneath the surface, shown everyone that peace without justice wasn't peace at all. It was just quiet suffering. With 2 hours remaining, the Presidium made a decision that would reshape galactic civilization. They activated an emergency protocol that had never been used in the Council's entire history. Every member species received the same message simultaneously. A complete restructuring of galactic law was being implemented immediately, not in years or decades, but right now. The new laws were radical. Mandatory protection standards for all children regardless of species origin. Independent oversight committees with real enforcement power. criminal penalties for officials who covered up abuse or failed to act on reports. And most shocking of all, humanity would be given permanent seats on these oversight committees, positions they couldn't be removed from through political maneuvering. The Council was giving humanity exactly what they demanded, but they were also giving them responsibility. If humans wanted to be the galaxy's protectors of the innocent, they would have to do the work, face the difficult decisions, and live with the consequences of enforcement. The diplomat from a species known for their cautious nature stood before the assembled council and spoke words that many had been thinking, but no one dared say. We should thank them. Humanity just did what we should have done centuries ago. They forced us to be better than we were. But then something happened that no one expected. The small human girl, recovered enough to travel, appeared via holographic transmission in the council chamber. Her mother stood beside her, one protective hand on her daughter's shoulder. The child looked at the thousands of beings watching her, and she spoke with the simple honesty that only children possess. I don't want people to fight because of me, she said, her voice quiet but clear. I just want to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. Can you promise me that? The chamber fell completely silent. This child, who had every reason to hate the galaxy that had failed her, was asking for something that had nothing to do with revenge. She wanted safety for others. She wanted the system to work the way it should have worked all along. The Presidium knelt, an action so shocking that gasps echoed throughout the chamber. In thousands of years of galactic history, the Presidium had never knelt at anyone, but they knelt now, before this small human child, and spoke an oath that would be remembered for generations. We promise you, not just in words, but in action. What happened to you will be the last failure of its kind. We will build a galaxy worthy of all our children. The human fleet powered down their weapons. The countdown stopped with 90 minutes remaining. The crisis that had brought the galaxy to the edge of war ended not with explosions or treaties, but with a child's request and the galaxy's decision to finally honor it. But as the Council began implementing the new systems, as species across the galaxy started reporting incidents they had previously hidden, as the true scale of the work ahead became clear, the Admiral sent one final private message to the Council that only a handful of beings were cleared to read. You made the right choice today. But understand this. Humanity will be watching. We will always be watching. And if you ever forget why these laws exist, if you ever slide back into comfortable corruption, we won't give you 48 hours next time. The mother held her daughter close as the transmission ended, knowing that what happened over these past 2 days would define how billions of children across the galaxy grew up. The little girl looked up at her mother with those innocent eyes that had somehow changed the course of galactic history. Mama, why did everyone get so upset? I'm okay now. The mother smiled, tears streaming down her face, and kissed her daughter's forehead. I know, sweetheart, but we're making sure that okay is never good enough again. The galaxy had changed. The question now was whether it would stay changed, or if humanity had just postponed an inevitable confrontation that would be far more devastating when it finally came. The communication channels lit up with a single message broadcast from every human ship, every human colony, every human station throughout the galaxy, and the words made even the bravest council members feel fear they had never known before. We are not your enemy. We are your mirror. The message played on repeat across every frequency, in every language, reaching every corner of civilized space. But it was what came after that changed everything. Humanity released their complete military records from the past 2 centuries, every classified file, every hidden project, every secret they had kept since joining the galactic community. The archivist nearly collapsed when she saw the scope of what humanity had been hiding. It wasn't just ships and weapons, though those were terrifying enough. Humanity had been conducting a galaxy-wide investigation for decades, documenting every instance of injustice, every covered-up crime, every case where the Council had failed to protect the vulnerable. Thousands of incidents, hundreds of species involved, patterns of abuse that had been ignored because they weren't politically convenient to address. The data was meticulous, verified through multiple sources, and absolutely damning. Humanity hadn't just been preparing for war. They had been building a case against the entire galactic order. They knew, the archivist whispered, scrolling through files that detailed atrocities she had never heard about despite spending her life studying galactic history. They knew everything we were hiding, and they stayed silent. Until now. But the revelation that shook the Council to its core came from an unexpected source. The spy, a deep-cover operative who had infiltrated human society years ago, finally broke her silence and sent an emergency report that reached the Presidium's private channels. "You need to understand what you're really facing," her message began. "I've lived among humans for 6 years. I've watched their families, studied their culture, analyzed their psychology. And I'm telling you now, retreat. Give them what they want. Because what we saw today isn't humanity going to war. This is humanity showing restraint." The Presidium read her report with growing horror. The spy explained that human history was filled with conflicts far more brutal than anything the current galactic civilization had ever witnessed. She described wars where humans had fought each other with such ferocity that they nearly destroyed their own planet multiple times. She detailed weapons they had developed that could end all life on a world, weapons they still possessed but had never revealed to the Council. "The fleet we're seeing right now," the spy wrote, "that's a measured response. That's humanity being diplomatic. If they truly wanted revenge, if they weren't still trying to be the species we asked them to be, they could sterilize entire sectors before we even knew they had launched. The fact that they gave us 48 hours, that they're still talking, that they haven't already acted, that's not weakness. That's mercy we don't deserve." The revelation triggered chaos in the Council chambers. Species that had been calling for a military response suddenly went silent. The mathematics of the situation had completely changed. Humanity wasn't just another member species that needed to be brought back in line. They were potentially the most dangerous civilization in the known galaxy, and they had been playing by everyone else's rules only because they chose to. The counselor from the Merchants Guild stood up, his voice shaking. "We need to discuss something no one wants to acknowledge. What if humanity is right? What if our entire system is broken, and we've been too comfortable to notice?" It was a question that should have been asked decades ago, but it took the threat of annihilation to make it impossible to ignore. Other council members began speaking up, sharing their own observations about systematic failures in galactic justice. Stories of crimes that went unpunished because the perpetrators had political connections. Cases that were buried because they might upset delicate trade agreements. Children from less powerful species who suffered while the council looked away because intervention would be inconvenient. The teacher, who had been educating young humans on one of their colony worlds, sent a testimony that was broadcast across multiple networks. She belonged to a species known for their wisdom and patience, and her words carried weight. "I've spent years with human children," she said, her image appearing on screens throughout the galaxy. "And I've learned something profound. Human parents teach their young a concept they call standing up for those who can't stand up for themselves. It's not just words. It's embedded in their stories, their games, their entire worldview. The child who is heard is everyone's child in human psychology. They literally cannot abandon her without abandoning who they are as a species." She paused, and when she continued, there were tears in her eyes. "And I realized something that shames me. We lost that. Somewhere in our thousands of years of civilization, we became so focused on stability and order that we forgot why those things mattered. We forgot that justice isn't about maintaining systems. It's about protecting people." 8 hours remaining, and reality began to shift in ways the council had never anticipated. The supervisor who had pushed the child was found dead in his cell, not by violence, but by his own hand, unable to live with what he had triggered. But humanity's response wasn't celebration. Instead, the human delegate issued a statement that confused many species. He should have faced trial. He should have been held accountable through proper channels. His death changes nothing about our demands, because this was never about one individual. This is about whether the galaxy will build systems that prevent future harm or continue pretending that isolated incidents are acceptable. The philosopher, one of the galaxy's great thinkers, realized what humanity was actually doing. They weren't seeking revenge. They were forcing a reckoning. Every species in the galaxy now had to confront an uncomfortable question. If we were in humanity's position, what would we do? As the final hours ticked away, the Council made their preparations. But instead of military deployments or diplomatic negotiations, they did something unprecedented. They began drafting new laws, real protections with actual enforcement mechanisms, systems that would make it impossible for another child, any child, to be hurt and ignored. But would it be enough? Would humanity accept reforms that came under the threat of violence? Or had the galaxy already crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed? 3 hours remaining, and the human fleet transmitted their final position coordinates, and what the Council saw made them realize that everything they thought they understood about this crisis had been completely wrong from the very beginning. 24 hours remaining, and still the Council debated while humanity's warships closed the distance, their weapons powered up and ready, waiting for the deadline to expire. The child's mother sat beside her daughter's hospital bed, holding a small hand that had finally stopped trembling. The medical staff had done their job well. The physical injuries were healing exactly as predicted, but the mother could see something in her daughter's eyes that no medicine could fix. A confusion that came from learning too early that the universe wasn't always safe, that cruelty existed even in places that should have been protected. "Why did he push me, Mama?" the little girl asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The mother didn't have an answer that would make sense to a 7-year-old mind. How could she explain hatred to someone who had never felt it? How could she describe prejudice to a child who had only ever known love and acceptance within her human community? So instead, she simply held her daughter closer and made a promise that she knew millions of other humans were making at that exact moment. "It will never happen again, sweetheart. I promise you that." Across the station, the supervisor who had caused all of this sat in a detention cell, finally beginning to understand the magnitude of his mistake. He had thought humans were just another species, maybe a bit emotional but ultimately controllable through standard legal frameworks. He had pushed the child because she was in his way, because he could, because in his mind she represented a species that didn't deserve respect. Now he watched the news feeds showing human fleets gathering like storm clouds on the horizon. He saw interviews with human civilians calmly explaining that they would go to war over this. He read statements from human leaders who spoke not of revenge, but of principles that could not be compromised. And slowly, terribly, he realized that he hadn't just hurt one child. He had attacked something fundamental to an entire species. The mediator arrived at the council chambers with a proposal she hoped might prevent catastrophe. Her species had served as neutral arbitrators for thousands of years, resolving conflicts through careful negotiation and compromise. She had ended wars, prevented genocides, and brought peace to dozens of species who thought reconciliation was impossible. But as she presented her carefully crafted solution to the council, offering measured justice and systematic reforms spread over years of gradual implementation, she watched the human delegation's faces and knew her proposal was dead on arrival. The deputy ambassador, a woman who had spent decades building relationships with other species, spoke with a sadness that cut deeper than anger ever could. "You still don't understand," she said quietly. "You're trying to negotiate as if this is about politics or territory or resources. You're offering us compromises and long-term solutions and diplomatic language that means nothing will really change. But this isn't a negotiation. This is a moment where the galaxy decides what kind of place it wants to be." The mediator felt something she rarely experienced: helplessness. She could see the logic in the human position, could understand the emotional weight driving their response. But she also saw the bigger picture. If humanity acted on their threat, it would shatter the fragile peace that had taken millennia to build. Other species would see human violence and react with their own military buildups. The cycle of escalation would destroy everything. "Please," the mediator said, and the desperation in her voice shocked everyone present. "Give us more time. Let us find a solution that satisfies everyone." The deputy ambassador shook her head slowly. "Time is what you've had for 200 years. Time to build systems that protect all children, not just the ones from powerful species. Time to create real accountability instead of bureaucratic procedures that protect the guilty. You had time, and you chose not to use it. Now time has run out." Meanwhile, something unexpected was happening throughout the galaxy. Species that had initially condemned humanity's response began receiving messages from their own populations. Parents from 100 different worlds sent images of their own children to their leaders, asking a simple question. If this happened to my child, would you do less than the humans are doing? The physician, who had treated thousands of patients from dozens of species, posted a video that went viral across every communication network. She stood in her clinic, surrounded by images of children she had saved over her long career, and spoke directly to the council. I have dedicated my life to healing, she said, her voice steady but her eyes fierce. I have sworn oaths to protect the vulnerable and defend those who cannot defend themselves. Every species claims to value their young. Every civilization says children are their future. But humans are the only ones who actually mean it. They are the only ones willing to sacrifice everything to prove that words have meaning. Her message sparked something unexpected. Protests began appearing on worlds that had initially supported the Council's cautious approach. Not violent demonstrations, but silent gatherings of parents holding their children, standing in solidarity with humanity's position. The political calculation that had seemed so clear hours ago suddenly became murky. The Council's military advisors presented their analysis behind sealed doors. The Fleet Marshal, responsible for all Council defense forces, laid out the brutal mathematics of the situation. Even if they combined their entire military capability, they couldn't stop humanity's assault on the target sector. The humans had hidden shipyards throughout their territory, building vessels that violated every treaty limitation they had agreed to. But more disturbing was the revelation that humanity had carefully positioned their fleets to ensure that any retaliatory strike would require passing through civilian shipping lanes. The humans had made it impossible to attack them without causing massive casualties among innocent traders and travelers. They had weaponized the galaxy's own interconnectedness. They planned this, the Fleet Marshal said, a mixture of admiration and horror in his voice. Not this specific incident, but they prepared for something like it. They've been ready for years, maybe decades, waiting for someone to give them justification. The Presidium felt a chill run through their ancient body. They had lived for centuries, had seen empires rise and fall, had witnessed the birth of the Galactic Council itself, and in all that time, they had never encountered a species quite like humanity. Others fought for survival or conquest or ideology, but humans fought for principles, abstract concepts that they valued more than their own lives. 12 hours remaining, and the Council finally faced the truth they had been avoiding. They weren't negotiating with humanity. They were being tested, and the entire galaxy would live with the consequences of whether they passed or failed. The communication channels lit up with a single message broadcast from every human ship, every human colony, every human station throughout the galaxy, and the words made even the bravest council members feel fear they had never known before. Hashtag one human child was hurt. The galaxy paid in blood. They thought one injury would go unnoticed in a galaxy of trillions, but humanity had been waiting centuries for someone to cross that line. The council chamber fell silent when the footage began to play. 12 species, each representing billions of souls across their respective star systems, watched as the transmission flickered to life on the holographic display. What they saw would reshape galactic politics forever. A small human child, no more than 7 cycles old, lay motionless on the cold floor of a mining station orbiting a distant moon. The wound wasn't fatal. The bruising would heal. But something had been set in motion that the galaxy wasn't prepared to face. The ambassador stood perfectly still as the video ended. His expression remained neutral, diplomatic, just as it had been for the past 200 years of humanity's membership in the Galactic Council. But those who knew humans, really knew them, could see something flickering behind his eyes. It wasn't anger. Anger would have been merciful. This was something ancient, something that predated spaceflight and diplomacy and all the careful treaties that held the fragile peace together. The child survived, the Presidium announced, as if that simple fact would calm the situation. Medical reports confirm full recovery within days. Surely, this matter can be resolved through standard arbitration protocols. The ambassador didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked down at his datapad, scrolling through messages that continued to flood in from Earth and every human colony scattered across 3 spiral arms. The messages all said the same thing in different ways. They all asked the same question. And humanity, it seemed, had already decided on the answer. How many? The ambassador finally asked, his voice quiet but carrying across the vast chamber. The presidium shifted uncomfortably. I'm not sure I understand the question. How many times? The ambassador repeated, each word measured and deliberate. Has a child been hurt in your jurisdiction? Any child from any species? Give me the exact number over the past decade. The council members exchanged glances. The question seemed absurd. Accidents happened. Mining operations were dangerous. The galaxy was vast and occasionally chaotic despite their best efforts. Surely humans understood this basic reality. We don't track such specific data, the Presidium admitted. Minor injuries are common in industrial sectors. Your own species signed waivers acknowledging the inherent risks when you began colonization efforts in that region. The ambassador nodded slowly, as if he'd expected exactly that response. He turned off his data pad and looked up at the assembled council with an expression that sent chills through even the most battle-hardened species in attendance. Then let me educate you about something you've clearly misunderstood about humanity, he began. You've seen us at peace for 2 centuries. You've watched us build, trade, negotiate, and compromise. You've seen us smile at your jokes, adopt your customs, and integrate into your carefully structured galactic community. You thought you knew us. He paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the chamber. But you've only ever known diplomatic humanity. You've only seen the version of us that chose to put away our warships and join your council. You thought that version was all we were. You thought our history was just history, ancient bloodshed that we'd evolved beyond. The ambassador pulled up a new display. Star charts appeared, showing human territory scattered across multiple sectors. What caught everyone's attention wasn't the colonies themselves, but the network of structures that suddenly became visible between them. Massive installations that hadn't appeared on any previous scans. Defense platforms that shouldn't exist according to treaty limitations. And ships. So many ships. We didn't evolve beyond violence, the ambassador continued, his voice taking on an edge that made several council members physically recoil. We just chose to control it. We chose to be diplomatic. We chose to be your partners. But choice implies alternatives, doesn't it? The Presidium attempted to interrupt, but the ambassador raised his hand. That child you're calling an acceptable casualty has a name. She has parents who kissed her goodnight before her shift at the learning center. She has a brother who saved for months to buy her a birthday gift. She has a grandmother who taught her old Earth songs that nobody else remembers anymore. And yesterday, someone hurt her because they didn't think it mattered. The displays shifted again, now showing mobilization orders. Human fleets that had been scattered across dozens of systems were converging, not toward Earth, not toward their colonies, toward the sector where the incident occurred. We've spent 200 years proving we could be trusted, the ambassador said, his words echoing through the shocked silence. We've shown you patience, restraint, and cooperation beyond anything you demanded. We became the species you needed us to be. But you made a miscalculation. You thought our kindness was weakness. You thought our peace was surrender. He turned toward the exit, his message delivered. The Council has 48 hours to deliver those responsible and enact new protections for children across all species in galactic territory. If those demands aren't met, you'll discover what happens when humanity stops choosing peace. The door sealed behind him, leaving the Council in chaos. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, humanity's warships continued their silent approach, waiting for the clock to run out. The news spread faster than light itself, carried through quantum communication networks that connected every corner of civilized space. Within hours, every species knew what had happened. A human child had been injured on a mining station, and humanity had issued an ultimatum that shook the foundations of galactic order. What most species didn't understand was why humanity reacted this way. The collective, a hive-mind species that had existed for millennia, issued a public statement calling the human response disproportionate and irrational. The Merchants Guild, who controlled most trade routes, suggested economic sanctions to bring humanity back to reasonable terms. Even species that had fought alongside humans in previous conflicts questioned whether their old allies had finally lost their sense of perspective. But there were a few who remembered, a few who had studied human history before they joined the galactic community. The scholar sat in her private library, surrounded by thousands of data crystals containing information about every species in known space. She had spent her entire life studying civilizations, understanding what drove them, what shaped their values, and what lines they would never allow others to cross. When the news reached her homeworld, she immediately began pulling up every file she had on humanity. What she found terrified her. Humans had a word they used throughout their history, appearing in dozens of their languages across different continents and time periods. The word changed its pronunciation, its spelling, its exact meaning, but the core concept remained the same. It translated roughly to the line that must not be crossed. Every human civilization, from their earliest recorded history to their current spacefaring society, had defined certain acts as unforgivable. Harm to children sat at the very top of that list. The scholar discovered records of human wars that had started over far less. She found documentation of entire armies mobilizing because a single child had been threatened in a distant land. She read accounts of human communities that had torn themselves apart hunting down anyone who hurt the innocent. And in every case, the response was always the same. Swift. Absolute. Without compromise. She tried to contact the council immediately, but the communication lines were jammed with traffic. Everyone wanted answers. Everyone wanted to understand what humanity was thinking. But the scholar knew something others didn't. Humanity wasn't thinking anymore. They were reacting, following instincts hardwired into their species over millions of years of evolution. Meanwhile, on the human colony world closest to the incident, something unprecedented was happening. The governor stood on the balcony of the administrative center, watching as civilians volunteered for military service. Not dozens, not hundreds, thousands upon thousands of ordinary people, many who had never held a weapon in their lives, stood in lines that stretched beyond the horizon. Teachers, engineers, artists, farmers, all of them ready to fight if the council failed to meet humanity's demands. "Why are they doing this?" the governor's assistant asked, genuinely confused. "Most of them don't even know the child. They've never met her family. This incident happened sectors away." The governor didn't answer immediately. How could he explain something so fundamental to being human that it didn't require explanation? How could he make someone understand that every human who saw that footage saw their own child, their own sibling, their own innocent past lying hurt on that cold floor? "Because she's ours," the governor finally said, "and we protect what's ours." Back on the station where the incident occurred, the investigation had taken an unexpected turn. The investigator, assigned by the council to determine exactly what happened, discovered that the injury wasn't accidental. Security footage showed the child being deliberately pushed by a station supervisor who viewed humans as inferior species unworthy of prime working areas. The act was casual, almost thoughtless, the kind of everyday cruelty that the supervisor probably never considered would have consequences. The investigator felt sick as he compiled his report. He belonged to a species that valued law and order above all else. His people had built their entire civilization on the principle that rules applied equally to everyone. But he also knew that his society had never truly been tested. They had never faced a situation where justice demanded action that might tear apart everything they'd built. He sent his findings to the council with a personal note attached. The words were simple but carried the weight of prophecy. They were right. We failed to protect a child under our jurisdiction. Whatever happens next, we earned it. The clock continued counting down. 36 hours remaining. The council held emergency sessions behind closed doors, debating responses and strategies. Some argued for military preparation, though even the most aggressive voices admitted that humanity's revealed fleet strength made direct conflict suicidal. Others pushed for diplomatic solutions, offering compensation and apologies and promises of reform. But a small group of council members, those who had served longest and understood the delicate balance of galactic politics, recognized something that terrified them. Humanity wasn't negotiating. They weren't posturing. They weren't trying to gain advantage or extract concessions. They had simply stated what would happen if their demands weren't met, and now they were waiting to see if the galaxy would choose justice or destruction. The veteran, a military commander from a warrior species, had fought in 3 major conflicts during his long career. He had seen civilizations rise and fall. He had witnessed the devastating power of advanced weapons and the horror of total war. And as he reviewed the tactical data on human fleet movements, he realized something that made his blood run cold. Humanity wasn't preparing for a battle. They were preparing for an execution. Every ship, every weapon, every soldier was positioned not for conquest or defense, but for absolute annihilation of a single target. They would glass the entire sector where the incident occurred, destroying everything and everyone, unless justice was served first. He tried to warn the Council, but they dismissed his concerns as exaggeration. Surely humanity wouldn't commit such a disproportionate act. Surely they understood that galactic unity mattered more than one child's suffering. The veteran knew better. He had studied human military doctrine. He understood that humans didn't fight wars to win territory or resources. They fought to send messages, to establish principles, to show the universe what happened when their values were violated. 24 hours remaining, and still the Council debated while humanity's warships closed the distance, their weapons powered up and ready, waiting for the deadline to expire.